is a comedy legend. Please welcome the great Bob Newhart, everybody.
For over 60 years, he was the undisputed king of the blank stare, the master of the mild-mannered stammer. Bob Newhart was a comedian who didn't have to shout to be heard. His power was in the pause, his genius buried in the silence. He built a legendary career by being the calm, rational center in a world of wonderful absurdity, a man who never seemed to break a sweat, much less his famously deadpan character. That was the Bob Newhart the world knew and loved, but what about the title of this video? Bob Newhart's final interview? The truth is, there wasn't one big, tearful, televised farewell. The real story is quieter, and frankly, more powerful. It wasn't written in a script or performed on a stage. It was a story told in the silence of his final year, a story not about the jokes he told, but about a love he lost. For the millions who had only ever seen the stoic comedian, what they witnessed was a quiet revelation. This is the story of those heartbreaking final moments, the ones that showed the raw vulnerability of a comedy icon and moved an entire generation of fans to tears. It's the story of how the man who made us laugh for decades taught us one last, profound lesson about love, loss, and what it really means to say goodbye. Before the world knew him as a comedy icon, George Robert Newhart was a numbers guy. Born in Oak Park, Illinois, on September 5, 1929, his early life pointed toward anything but the bright lights of Hollywood. After getting a business degree from Loyola University of Chicago in 1952, he was drafted into the U.S. Army, serving as a clerk during the Korean War until 1954. When he returned, he took a swing at law school and cycled through a few unremarkable jobs, eventually landing as an accountant. It was there, in the quiet world of bookkeeping, that the seeds of his comedy were accidentally planted. Newhart joked that his motto as an accountant was, "That's close enough," which, as you can imagine, didn't bode well for a career in finance. He was bored out of his mind. To break up the monotony, he and a friend started making long, absurd phone calls to each other, improvising bizarre characters and situations. They even recorded them, hoping to sell them to radio stations, but it was mostly a bust. Still, a local Chicago DJ saw something special in Newhart's style. That led to a Warner Brothers recording contract in a moment that would change comedy forever. In February 1960, the 30-year-old accountant, who had never performed a full stand-up set in a nightclub, took the stage in Houston, Texas. Warner Brothers recorded it, and the album became The Button-Down Mind of Bob Newhart. Nobody, especially Newhart himself, could have seen what was coming. The album was a cultural phenomenon. It shot to number 1 on the Billboard charts, the first comedy album in history to do so. And stayed there for 14 weeks, beating out giants like Elvis Presley and The Sound of Music. At one point, his follow-up album, The Button-Down Mind Strikes Back, was at number 2, meaning Bob Newhart held the top 2 spots on the album charts at the same time, something unheard of for a comedian. At the 1961 Grammys, he won Album of the Year, Best New Artist, and Best Comedy Performance. A guy who was balancing ledgers just months before was now one of the biggest names in entertainment. What made him so revolutionary? It was his method. Newhart's signature bit was the one-sided phone call. He'd play the straight man reacting to an unheard, and increasingly ridiculous, person on the other end of the line. The genius was in what he didn't say. The audience had to fill in the blanks, becoming part of the joke. His famous stammer wasn't a nervous tic, it was a weapon of comedic timing, a way to show disbelief and frustration without ever raising his voice. He was, as they say, listening funny. This rocket to fame led him straight to television. In 1972, he found the perfect home for his persona with The Bob Newhart Show. For 6 seasons, he played Dr. Robert Hartley, a low-key Chicago psychologist surrounded by neurotic patients and quirky friends. He wasn't the joke teller, he was the calm anchor in the middle of it all. The show was a massive hit, a key part of the legendary CBS Saturday night lineup that included All in the Family, MASH, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. A decade later, he did it all over again. In 1982, Newhart premiered, with Bob as an author who moves to Vermont to run an inn. Once again, he was the sane man in a world of eccentrics, most famously the handyman trio of Larry, his brother Daryl, and his other brother Daryl. The show ran for 8 successful seasons, cementing him as a TV icon. Throughout it all, his public persona was unshakable. He was the button-down man whose comedy was never mean or vulgar. It was smart, observational, and deeply human. As Reese Witherspoon later said, even his silence was funny. His reaction said everything the audience was thinking. He was a figure of comforting stability. This was the Bob Newhart the world adored. But behind the deadpan delivery was the force that grounded him, a love story that would define the final, poignant chapter of his life. In show business, where relationships can be notoriously short-lived, the love story of Bob and Ginny Newhart was a true institution. Their 60-year partnership wasn't just long-lasting, it was the foundation his entire career was built on. To understand the man on stage, you have to understand the woman who stood beside him. Their story started in 1962, set up by their mutual friend, comedian Buddy Hackett. Bob was a rising star, and Ginny Quinn was the daughter of character actor Bill Quinn. Hackett decided to play matchmaker. Bob told the story to People magazine years later. Buddy said, "I've got a girl for you. You'll meet her and you'll date and you'll get married. Then you'll have kids and you'll call one of the kids Buddy." Amazingly, Hackett was right on all counts. Bob and Ginny married on January 12, 1963. They had 4 children, and yes, they affectionately nicknamed one of their daughters Buddy. Their shared faith and heritage helped, but Bob always said it was their shared sense of humor that was the real secret. The marriages of comedians seem to last a long time, and I attribute it to laughter, he once said. No matter how intense the argument, you can find a line, and then you both look at each other and start laughing. It's over, you know. Ginny was so much more than the comedian's wife, she was his rock and his secret creative weapon. Her most legendary contribution came as his second sitcom, Newhart, was ending its run. The writers were struggling to find a memorable finale. At a Christmas party, Ginny had a stroke of pure genius. Bob told her he was thinking of ending the show, and as he recalled, without missing a beat, she said, "You ought to end it with a dream sequence where you wake up in bed with Susie." Susie was Suzanne Pleshette, his on-screen wife from The Bob Newhart Show. Ginny's idea was that the entire 8-year run of Newhart was just a bizarre dream of his first character, Dr. Bob Hartley. It was brilliant. The idea was kept top secret, with a fake script written to throw off the press. On filming day, Suzanne Pleshette was snuck onto the set, hidden from almost everyone. The final scene, which aired on May 21, 1990, became one of the most iconic moments in TV history. Bob, as Dick Loudon, gets knocked out by a golf ball, and the screen cuts to the familiar Chicago apartment from his first show. He wakes up as Bob Hartley next to Emily, Pleshette, and tells her about the craziest dream he just had about being an innkeeper in Vermont. The studio audience went absolutely wild. That moment is still hailed as one of the best series finales ever, and it was all Ginny's idea. For 60 years, they were a team. They raised a family and navigated Hollywood together. Their journey continued until April 23, 2023. On that day, after a long illness, Ginny Newhart passed away at 82. Bob, then 93, announced the news with a simple, heartbreaking statement: "She was our rock and we miss her terribly." For a man who spent a lifetime with a calm public demeanor, it was a rare glimpse into his personal grief. After 60 years, he was facing his final chapter without the love of his life. The year after Ginny's death was a quiet one for Bob Newhart. For the first time in 6 decades, the center of his world was gone. While he mostly stayed out of the public eye, his final screen appearances took on a new, powerful meaning. His last acting role was a return to the character that finally won him a long-overdue Primetime Emmy in 2013, Arthur Jeffries, aka Professor Proton. He made his final appearances not on his own show, but on Young Sheldon, the spin-off of The Big Bang Theory, which had introduced him to a whole new generation. His final voiceover as the character was in a 2020 episode. Seeing him, even then, delivering his lines with that same gentle timing felt like a final gift from a master, but the most emotional performance was the one he wasn't acting. In the quiet space left by Ginny's absence, the final story of his life was being written. It wasn't just about comedy anymore, it was about love, loss, and endurance. The public saw a man who had lost his partner of 60 years, and the collective heart of his fans went out to him. On July 18, 2024, just over a year after Ginny passed, Bob Newhart died at his home in Los Angeles. He was 94. His publicist said he died from complications of several short illnesses. The news felt like the closing of a major chapter in entertainment history. This was the moment that brought fans to tears, not a single interview, but the powerful, collective realization of what, and who, had been lost. Tributes flooded in. Ben Stiller called him an iconic comedic actor and an incredibly kind man. Reese Witherspoon remembered his kindness and humor, saying, "I feel so lucky that I got to share the screen with such a legend." Kaylee Cuoco, his co-star from The Big Bang Theory, wrote, "What a dream it was to witness the genius that was Bob Newhart. Icon forever." Judd Apatow called him the kindest, most hilarious man. For so many, the reaction felt personal because Newhart represented something more than just laughs. In a world that keeps getting louder and more cynical, he was a figure of quiet decency. His humor never punched down. He made people laugh by holding up a mirror to life's absurdities and reacting with a calm bewilderment we could all relate to. He was Papa Elf in the movie Elf, a role that cemented his status as a beloved figure for yet another generation. The story of his final year, so deeply intertwined with the loss of his wife, gave his legacy a new, profound emotional layer. Fans didn't just see the end of a great career, they saw the end of a great love story. The quiet man of comedy, who built a career on understated reactions, left the world with one last, powerful emotional statement without ever having to say a single word. It was a story of devotion that hit even harder than his greatest punchlines. Bob Newhart's legacy is really two stories in one. On one hand, he's the revolutionary comedian, the button-down mind who changed stand-up and sitcoms forever. He proved you didn't need to be loud to own a stage and that a pause could be funnier than any punchline. He gave us Dr. Bob Hartley and Dick Loudon, two of TV's most beloved characters, and a series finale that will be talked about as long as television exists. That alone would be enough to make him a legend, but the final chapter of his life showed us the other. Equally important, part of his legacy, the story of Bob the husband, the devoted partner to one woman for 60 years. The vulnerability that followed the loss of his Ginny taught the world a final lesson, not about comedy, but about the grounding power of love. In the end, the man famous for his deadpan face showed us the true depth of his heart, that he made millions laugh with his stammer and his perfectly timed silences. But the story of his final year, marked by a quiet, profound grief, is what left so many in tears. It added a beautiful layer of humanity to the comedy icon. Bob Newhart taught us how to laugh at life's absurdities, but his life taught us about the quiet strength of the human heart, and how a 60-year love story can be the most powerful finale of all. What is your favorite Bob Newhart moment? A one-sided phone call? A scene from the Bob Newhart Show or Newhart? Or maybe his role as Papa Elf? Share your memories in the comments below, and let's celebrate the legacy of a true original.